Welcome to Reformed Thinking. This is the deep dive where we take a specific body of work, a commentary, a set of articles, or a classic text, and really try to break it open for all of us.
Today we're going right to the very beginning of the Psalter. We're looking at Psalm 1.
And for our source material, we have John Peter Lange's comprehensive commentary, which is just an incredible resource. It's got exegetical, critical, doctrinal, and practical insights packed into it.
It's a huge work, and our mission today is to really get to the heart of what Lange is saying about this short but incredibly potent psalm.
That's right. We want to unpack its structure, understand the theological analysis, and maybe most critically, pull out the practical applications. I mean, Psalm 1 is so often called the introduction to the whole book of Psalms.
And for good reason.
Yeah.
It immediately sets up this stark, decisive contrast. It's really about the fundamental ethical and religious separation that exists among all people.
It's amazing how much it does in just 6 verses.
It really is. It sets the whole tone. It starts with this declaration of ultimate blessing, the word ashrei, and it finishes with a sentence of complete ruin.
So it frames life as a fundamental choice, a choice with consequences that are, well, entirely determined by your posture toward God's revealed will.
Exactly. If you want to get a handle on the message of the entire Psalter, you have to start here. You have to dissect this prologue correctly.
All right, so let's get into that. The structure, its purpose. Where do we begin?
Well, the first thing to look at is just its placement. Why is it here at the very front? And there's a long tradition, going way back to the church fathers like Basil, and then later reinforced by John Calvin.
They all saw it as a kind of preface.
A short preface or a prologue to the entire collection. This wasn't a random decision. The compiler of the Psalter clearly intended for this psalm to be the thematic entry point.
And there's structural evidence for that idea, isn't there? Lange points out how the whole first book of Psalms is kind of framed by this.
That's right. It really suggests a highly deliberate arrangement. The first book, which is Psalms 1 through 41, is bracketed by this beatitude.
So it opens with Asherah in Psalm 1, verse 1, and again in Psalm 2, verse 12.
And then it closes the exact same way in Psalm 40, verse 4, and Psalm 41, verse 1. That's a powerful literary device. It's not an accident.
It creates a kind of symmetry.
A beautiful symmetry. And you see this beatitude pop up again and again later on in Psalm 32, 112, 1 and 19. It suggests a governing theme. Psalm 1 sets out the general, universal truth.
The two types of people, the two destinies.
Right. And then what does Psalm 2 do immediately after?
It takes that universal principle and grounds it in a specific historical situation.
Precisely. Psalm 2 applies the principle, righteousness versus opposition to a concrete event. The conflict between God's anointed king, the Messiah, and the rebellious nations who want to throw off his rule.
So it moves from the ethical question in Psalm 1, how should a person live, to the messianic question in Psalm 2, how will God's plan actually work out in history?
Yes, and the righteous king triumphs, which shows that the blessing announced in Psalm 1 is ultimately secure in him. This opening 1-2 punch is theologically crucial for understanding everything that follows in the Psalter.
Okay, so we've established the structural framework. Now, the next big question with any ancient text is always about timing. When was this written? Who wrote it?
And that's a key question. Some ancient Jewish traditions try to say David wrote Psalm 1, but Lange's analysis confirms what most scholars think, that attribution doesn't really have a solid historical foundation.
So if it wasn't David, where does it fit?
Well, Lange argues pretty convincingly against placing it too late, like during the Maccabean period, which some critics suggested. He looks at the internal evidence in the text itself.
And what does that evidence point to?
First, the vocabulary. The specific Hebrew word used for scorner, that's latz, is very distinctive. It points to the sententious wisdom style that was really characteristic of the age of Solomon.
The age of Proverbs.
Exactly. The whole psalm has that same kind of structural feel and practical focus that you find in the wisdom literature.
That's a fascinating detail. So just one word choice, latz, can help anchor the dating. What is it about the scorner that makes it so unique to that period?
The scorner is an archetype, a character that's explored systematically in the book of Proverbs. He's the man who rejects instruction, mocks authority, despises correction. This whole contrast between the wise man and the scorner is a hallmark of that literary tradition. If the psalm were much later, the language would probably reflect different concerns.
And beyond just the vocabulary, the psalm also connects to the rest of Scripture, right? It doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Absolutely. Verse 2, where the righteous man meditates on the law, seems to look directly back to the instructions God gave to Joshua.
In Joshua 1.8.
Yes, establishing a continuity with that earlier revelation. And then, on the other hand, the vivid imagery in verse 3, the blessed man is the planted tree, that serves as an earlier template that later prophets picked up on.
Like Jeremiah and Ezekiel.
Right? You see it carried forward and elaborated on in Jeremiah 17 and Ezekiel 19. So it's much more plausible that the psalmist established this motif, which the prophets then adapted, rather than the other way around. And that suggests an earlier composition date for Psalm 1.
So what we have is a text, likely from the wisdom tradition, intentionally placed as the prologue to the Psalter, setting this theme of righteousness versus ruin. Which brings us back to the very first word, that exclamation that kicks the whole book off, ashray.
Ashray.
What exactly does that declaration of happiness mean?
Well, if you trace the etymology of the Hebrew word, it signifies a straight and direct course. That original idea of a guided path leads right into the meaning of well-being, welfare, blessedness. It's not just a description, it's a pronouncement.
And Lange's commentary clarifies that grammatically, it's an exclamation, a declaration of recognition and praise beatitudins ilias viri, the blessings, plural, of that man.
It carries a lot of emphatic weight because it's a substantive, a noun, not a verb. It's a state of being, not just a fleeting feeling.
And Martin Luther had a great insight on this.
He did. He captured the feeling of this opening perfectly. He said that the prophet, looking out at a world where you see so little true piety, just suddenly bursts forth and says, "Blessed is the man."
It's a prophetic, joyful announcement of God's favor and success on a person whose whole life is oriented differently, a divine status declaration.
Which immediately separates the human race into two camps. And if we want to understand this immense blessing, we first have to understand the character of the man who receives it. And the psalm starts, almost counterintuitively, by describing what he actively avoids.
All right, verse 1 is so sophisticated in its structure. It's this striking double climax. It's not just about a single sin, but a progression. Walketh, standeth, sitteth, and then counsel wasteth. It seems to be mapping a kind of spiritual descent.
That's the essential reading, according to Lange and others like Ibn Ezra. This isn't just poetic variation for the sake of it. It's a deliberate intensification. It charts a slow, almost inevitable downward slide into a hardened spiritual condition.
And the righteous man is blessed because he resists even the first step.
He puts up a perpetual active resistance to it. That's the key.
So let's break that progression down, starting with first, most subtle step. He has not walked in the counsel of the ungodly. What's the significance of counsel there?
This first stage is all about the sphere of the heart and the mind. It's where sinful intentions begin. The word for ungodly, rasha, is the most general term for the wicked, the one who stands in contrast to the righteous.
Okay.
But the key word is etza, which means advice or design or resolution. So walking in this counsel means adopting the mindset, the sphere of influence, the resolutions formed inside a wicked heart. It's the initial thought, the bad example you follow, the mental agreement before you even do anything.
So it all starts with the internal disposition, accepting the worldview or the moral premises of the wicked. So how does that walking in the counsel transition to the second, more stationary phase?
The second stage is nor standeth in the way of sinners. Here we've moved from the internal sphere to the external, visible realm of practice.
And standing implies something more permanent.
It implies permanence, perseverance. You're no longer just visiting the council for advice. You've sort of taken up residency there. And the term for sinners here, chata, refers to the habitual sinner, the one whose sin is no longer just occasional, but who is marked by the practice of evil deeds.
And the way, the direct that describes their conduct, their manner of acting.
Exactly. It's the visible course of their life. If the first stage was consenting to the wicked's thoughts, this second stage is participating in their deeds. The righteous man avoids adopting the habits and the consistent behavior patterns that define the life of the habitual sinner. He doesn't just flirt with the idea. He refuses to set his feet permanently on that road.
Which leads us to the final, and I think most chilling stage of this progression. Nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. This sounds like more than just participation. It implies a fixed, settled, even malicious companionship.
It is. The verb for sitting, yashab, conveys a fixed, established position, maybe a section where they're fully comfortable. This is the moral and spiritual climax of the descent. And as we said earlier, the scorner, the lutz, is the worst class of the wicked man.
Worse than the habitual sinner.
Yes. He's moved beyond just sinning habitually. He's become hardened to the point of active, open malice.
How does Lange detail that hardening? What really separates the scorner from the sinner?
The scorner, in wisdom literature, is the one who actively hates correction. He actively suppresses a good conscience and this is critical, he makes sport of holy things.
So he doesn't just fail to live righteously, he openly mocks virtue.
He scoffs at the claims of God's revealed instruction. He actively tries to pull other people away from piety. His wickedness isn't passive anymore, it's institutionalized and antagonistic.
And to sit in the seat of the scornful, that implies what? Fellowship,
Yeah.
authority.
It could imply all of those. Fellowship, established authority, maybe even teaching or leading others in derision. The righteous man avoids their company entirely because he recognizes this state as the most dangerous and spiritually lethal environment you can be in.
So we trace this downward spiral. First, the wicked thought, which is the counsel of the ungodly. Then the wicked deed, the way of the sinner. And finally, malicious contempt, the seed of the scorner.
And the whole verse defines the righteous man by his consistent refusal to engage in any part of this descent.
Which brings us to the grammar that Lange emphasizes. The three verbs are in the Hebrew perfect tense. What does that tense tell us? Why is that so important?
The perfect tense here is absolutely critical. It isn't describing three isolated events in the past, like he once avoided walking, he once avoided standing. It's not that.
It's more of a settled state.
Yes, it conveys what's called the abstract present. It indicates a characteristic that's already long continued and is still enduring. The psalmist is defining the righteous man as someone whose entire existence and established character is defined by the fact that he always and habitually avoids this progression.
That makes the blessing a consequence of his established character, not just a reward for a list of good deeds. It's an ingrained disposition.
Precisely. If the blessed man were described using, say, an imperfect tense, it might suggest he's just currently avoiding it. But the perfect tense applies to his whole disposition. This is the man who has always been separate, whose life has been consistently marked by this non-adoption of the wicked's practices.
So when we put all this together, the structure, the grammar, what's the core doctrinal warning that Lange pulls out of this for the believer?
The structure itself is a powerful, escalating warning. The gradations of evil pass into one another, often much faster than we think. The very first steps, subtly adopting the wicked's counsel, are already profoundly dangerous because they oppose God's expressed will.
And for us, holding to something like the Westminster Confession, we recognize the pervasive nature of our own indwelling sin.
Right. So Psalm 1 warns us that true blessedness starts with an active, habitual, comprehensive separation. Not just physical isolation, but a refusal to align our thoughts, our habits, or our settled companionships with the ungodly, the sinner, or the scorner. The moment we consent to the evil counsel, we're already on the way to the seat of the scorner.
So the path to blessedness starts not with some grand action, but with avoidance and a very careful guarding of the heart.
That's the negative side.
And after defining the righteous man by what he rejects, the psalm pivots sharply in verse 2 to define him by what he affirms. It uses that strong phrase, kiam.
Kiam, but if, or maybe more emphatically, on the contrary, it's a radical shift in focus. Now we get to the positive mark that defines his inner life.
Which is what?
But his delight is in the law of the Lord. This is it. This is the essential positive characteristic. And the first thing we want to understand is the object of his attention, the Torah, the law. And given the strong connection back to Joshua 1.8 and Deuteronomy 6.6, this isn't just some vague general revelation or natural law. It's referring specifically to the written instruction of Moses, the covenantal law, the revealed instruction given by Jehovah to his people.
And the righteous man finds not just an obligation in it, but his delight, his inclination. It's an affection, not just a duty.
And that delight is shown through a consistent practice. And in his law doth he meditate day and night. This introduces the practice of Haga.
The word meditate.
Yes. And etymologically, Haga is very visceral. It's related to murmuring, muttering, or a low vocal discourse.
That's interesting because when we hear meditate today, we often picture something totally silent, theoretical contemplation, but this sounds much more active.
It was far more physical and audible than our modern concept of just silent reading. Haga means ruminating over the divine instruction. It's a quiet soliloquy, kind of investigation or discourse within the soul, but often expressed by a low murmur or muttering sound.
So speaking it aloud to oneself.
Yes. Allowing the word to physically and audibly occupy the mind. Delitzsch called it the quiet soliloquy of investigation. It wasn't just abstract thinking. It was the active, almost devotional repetition of the text.
Which makes the phrase day and night even more profound. It implies this discourse is just perpetual.
It means it's a continual, perpetual exercise. Lange even notes that among the Jewish people, the night was historically seen as an especially good time for intensive study, from about 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning.
So it's not that the righteous man never sleeps or works.
Of course not. But it means that the law provides the underlying rhythm of his life. Whether he's working by day or reflecting by night, the Torah is the constant object of his affection and his mental occupation.
And it seems crucial that Lange draws a distinction here. He says this is a practical absorption, not a legalistic exercise. How does the delight part prevent this constant meditation from becoming just, brooding over the letter?
The affection is the safeguard. The righteous man finds joy in the instruction because he recognizes it as God's gracious path to life. It's the instruction of Jehovah, the covenant-keeping God. If the focus shifts from the giver of the law to just the letter of the law, that's when the exercise becomes burdensome and legalistic. But the focus here is on genuine spiritual hunger. The continual exercise of Haga is simply the outward sign of the internal delight that drives the man to seek nourishment from God's revealed will.
And this perpetual internal orientation, this delight and continuous absorption, it leads directly to the glorious description in verse 3. It shifts from the man's character to the consequences.
Right. And he shall be like a tree planted by the brooks of water.
An analogy that is so rich, especially in the context of the arid, demanding climate of the Orient.
We have to dissect every element. First, the comparison. The man is like a tree. He's granted stability and a life that mirrors a perfectly situated natural object.
Let's focus on that word planted. Lange highlights that the verb shows this is a guaranteed consequence of his conduct. But there's more there. There's an assertion of divine agency.
That is the cornerstone of the Reformed understanding of this verse. The tree did not select its own location. It did not plant itself. It was planted.
Which affirms that the man is righteous not by his own inherent strength or skill.
Not by his activity alone, but by divine agency, through the means of grace that divine mercy has established. Like the tree, he has to take up the nourishment from the streams God provides. But the planting is God's initial sovereign action.
That provides a really robust theological foundation against any kind of works-based reading of the psalm. The very ability to be righteous, to delight in the law, is itself a gift secured by God's choice and action.
Absolutely. The blessed man is dependent on the streams of grace, and his continual meditation, his Haga, is simply the means by which he draws that life-giving water up into his spiritual system.
And the imagery of the water itself underscores the sheer abundance of that supply. The term used for brooks, pelgi, is a double plural,
which emphasizes distribution and richness. It speaks of abundance, which is essential for continuous life in a dry climate. Luther famously referenced the evergreen date palms in the Jordan Valley trees that thrive because they have continuous deep access to water. This is an assurance that the means of grace God provides, His Word, His Spirit, will never run dry for the righteous soul.
And the result of this perfect placement and constant nourishment is guaranteed. That bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither. The output is reliable and timely.
The emphasis is on timeliness and reliability. The tree gives the expected fruit at the proper time. It never disappoints. And commentators throughout history have drawn clear spiritual parallels here.
The leaf and the fruit?
The fresh foliage, the leaves that don't wither, are a figure of faith. Faith stays vibrant and visible even in harsh times. It processes the water of life, the divine word, and changes it into spiritual sap.
And the fruit?
The fruit is the figure of works, the works of righteousness which ripen and spread blessings to others.
This moves us to the conclusion of the analogy, which can sound like a sweeping promise of worldly success. And whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. Now, we have to be careful not to mistake this for some guarantee of material comfort or an easy life, right? Especially when you consider the history of suffering among God's people. How does Lange define this promised prosperity?
This is a critical point that the commentary clarifies. The prosperity promised here is spiritual and providential, not necessarily material wealth or freedom from hardship.
So it's not the prosperity gospel?
Not at all. It's the experience described in the New Testament in 1 Timothy 4:8. Godliness is profitable for all things, having promise of the life that now is and of the one to come. The prosperity here means that the man's efforts, as long as they align with God's will achieve their intended spiritual purpose. His life will be effective in bearing fruit for the kingdom.
So he may suffer, he may face persecution, but his root system is secure, his fruit will ripen on time, and his overall life will be marked by divine favor.
That's it. The emphasis is on the fact that Jehovah, the covenant-keeping God of historical revelation, is the infallible guardian and rewarder. The security of the blessing is rooted entirely in the character and action of the one who did the planting and provides the water.
And now the narrative takes a dramatic turn in verse 4. After describing this vibrant, rooted life of the righteous man, the psalmist introduces the stark antithesis with just a few words. The ungodly are not so.
It's the counter-reality, the negative definition. The ungodly, even when they seem to be flourishing on the outside, they derive no actual lasting profit from their circumstances.
They haven't formed the faculty to receive nourishment.
Exactly. They have no delight, no meditation to appropriate the nourishment of life. Whatever seems to have matured in them is superficial. It fades. They remain without a root, without spiritual sap. They fail to attain any real vigor or bring forth any true fruit.
And their lack of substance is illustrated by that terrifying analogy of the chaff.
They are like the chaff, which the wind drives away. To get the full force of this image, you have to picture ancient agriculture. Threshing floors in the East were large, open areas, often located on heights, specifically so the wind could help with the winnowing.
So the good grain, which is heavy, it drops to the ground.
It drops, but the chaff light, hollow, empty, is just blown away.
Its disappearance is immediate and traceless.
And it illustrates two profound things about the wicked man. First, his destiny. A rapid, violent, and utterly traceless destruction. You see the same image in Psalm 35 or in the New Testament when John the Baptist talks about sifting in Matthew 3.
And the second thing.
Their inner condition. The chaff represents emptiness, hollowness, nullity. They stand in absolute contrast to the abiding nature of the good grain. The wicked man, though he might appear weighty and important in the world, is in his essence worthless and unsubstantial. He is ripened only for destruction.
And that fundamental emptiness leads directly to the consequence described in verse 5. Therefore, the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment. This isn't some random disaster, but an inevitable consequence, a just divine punishment.
We have to be precise about the term judgment here. This isn't a human court. It's not exclusively a messianic judgment. It's the inescapable divine judgment that's referenced again in the last verse.
And the phrase not stand, what does that mean?
It's crucial. It means they can't hold their ground, they can't maintain their position, they cannot be vindicated in the court of God. When they face God's perfect standard of justice, their whole way of life, based on their own counsel and their own way, will immediately collapse.
Some of the older interpreters speculated that not stand might refer to being excluded from the general resurrection. Does Lange support that reading at all?
No. The context and the meaning of the Hebrew word really argue against that narrow interpretation. The judgment here isn't just about physical exclusion from a moment in time. It's about the incapacity to be justified, to be declared righteous, or to stand firm against the weight of God's scrutiny. They may be resurrected, but they will not be vindicated.
And the verse continues, they shall not stand, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. This brings up a critical doctrinal distinction about God's people in the world.
It connects directly to the distinction we draw between the visible and the invisible church. As long as the people of God are here in this world, the visible church will always contain a mixture. You'll have hypocrites, false brethren, sinners, all mingled within the external gathering.
But the congregation of the righteous is something different.
That refers to the true, internal, spiritual people of God, organized and acknowledged by divine order.
The judgment then acts as the ultimate sifting mechanism, the final separation.
Precisely. The judgment serves to definitively sever the unrighteous from the true body of Christ. Even if the wicked wanted a place with the righteous in the end, they can't stand there because their core spiritual nature is chaff. This separation is the ultimate execution of divine righteousness that must and will sift the true from the false.
That gives so much practical weight to the warnings back in verse 1. If you follow the counsel, the way, and the seed of the scorner, you're aligning yourself with the chaff, regardless of your external profession or your participation in the visible assembly.
Your inner condition determines your eternal lot. The wicked may appear to thrive for a time, but their way is inherently unstable. They are like the lightest material on a high threshing floor, just waiting for the inevitable wind of judgment.
And the entire argument of the psalm culminates in the final verse. It provides the ultimate theological assurance for the righteous and the dreadful sentence for the ungodly.
Yes. Verse 6. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous.
This is the ultimate ground of certainty.
It is. And this knowing, because it's declared of Jehovah, the covenant God, is so much more than just theoretical awareness or simple cognition. Lange uses this powerful Latin phrase, nose cum affectu et effectu.
Meaning to acknowledge with affection and with effect.
Right. God's knowledge here is an active, covenantal acknowledgement. It's God confirming, guaranteeing, and actively safeguarding the righteous man's existence and his path.
So the righteous man prospers not just because he studied the law, but because the Almighty God is actively his guardian.
Exactly. This knowing provides the assurance. It guarantees the consequence promised back in verse 3 that secure fruitful life. Because God knows and upholds this way, error and deception are entirely excluded from the final divine judgment. A person's lot is determined not by chance or luck, but by righteous and infallible judgment that corresponds to their disposition towards God and His revealed word.
And then the final word of the psalm, it stands as the most terrifying contrast to Ashrei at the beginning. The entire path of the ungodly, their duresh, their way shall perish.
The Hebrew word is tobod. The finality of this closing word is absolute. It suggests the utter ruin and destruction associated with Abaddon. It's a lost way, bearing the character of inevitable and eventually endless destruction.
So while the righteous man's way is known and upheld by God,
The wicked man's way is actively abandoned by God. His lot is sealed in ruin. It's as terrifying as the lot of the pious is delightful.
so this short song really functions as a comprehensive summary of life, ethics, and destiny. The contrast is absolute. So based on Lange's full treatment, what are the key practical takeaways we should synthesize from this?
I think there are three main ones. First is the necessity of avoiding the society and the practices of the wicked. We have to recognize that the gradations are subtle. It starts with just an accepted evil thought or counsel, and we have to conscientiously guard against that first step.
Okay, that's number one. What's the second?
The absolute necessity of conscientiously using the means of grace. That means our continuance in righteousness is maintained by our delight and active absorption, our haga, in the holy law of God. The instruction of the Lord is what provides the constant supply from the streams of grace, allowing our roots to sink deep.
And the third?
We have to rely on the principle of divine agency. We draw comfort from that image of the planted tree. Piety does grant the righteous man power to withdraw from evil and withstand temptations, yes, but he only grows and matures because he is planted by God and takes up the nourishment afforded by God.
Which connects the whole psalm back to the broader framework of our Reformed faith. We are made righteous by divine action, justification by faith, and the state of grace then yields the necessary fruit.
That's it. The song leaves us with a necessary choice, and it's determined by where we find our delight. The contrast isn't theoretical. It defines our final outcome.
It really forces you to ask yourself, are my roots secure? As some of the commentators summarized it, you have to choose in this life the society and the way you wish to maintain forever.
Because the things in which you find your deepest delight will either bless you completely or destroy you entirely.
And that choice has eternal, irreversible consequences because the character of the divine judge guarantees the lot of both.
Absolutely. The way of the righteous is known and guarded. The way of the wicked is unknown, unsecured, and destined for ruin. As a final thought, Taub reminds us that the wicked man plows the sea. He leaves nothing substantial behind, nothing but the way on which he is whirled away to destruction. He who has nothing firm in heaven can have nothing sure on earth.
Thank you for helping us explore this powerful text and the meticulous analysis from Lange's commentary. It offers incredible clarity on the two paths before us.
It's been a privilege.
And thank you, our listener, for sharing your sources for this deep dive. We encourage you to continue your reflection on the absolute truth of the two paths laid out in Psalm 1.